right, everybody, welcome back to Omnic Lab. This week is 167, finishing up with September 2019. This week, we're going to be talking all about the PTR and the adjustments versus barriers. And hopefully, just hopefully, even if the barriers stick around, we have a little bit of a different skill set that you guys can play around with on the ladder. My name's Rob. I'm coming all the way in from a nice evening in the end of September on the 25th for me. It's also the 25th for Andres on a rare occasion. We're actually sharing the same date. Andres, welcome back to the show.
Hey yo. It's good to be back. Today we have a little special treat from Jeff, Papa Jeff. I think that when the new meta or the new 2-2-2 roll lock was introduced, we were expecting a lot of changes to happen to the game, and we didn't get to see much of those. At first, it was sort of left untouched. And, we've been seeing some interesting metas crop up here and there, but we have the first patch in the 2-2-2 roll lock, and a lot of changes have been introduced. So I'm excited to talk about those today.
Indeed, and the cool thing about this patch, too, is generally speaking, we don't get a whole lot of patches leading in from September to BlizzCon until right at BlizzCon when we get the biggest PTR announcement, right? Usually paired with some sort of hero.
Yeah, that's
But right
right.
now, what's going on is we got a big patch, relatively big patch with a lot of good changes in it, right before we get the next patch about Junkenstein's Revenge, which is likely to be coming soon for the next update for Halloween during October. So they've been rolling out some good changes now, and I'm really excited just to get into it. But before we do, there's a quick thing on our game night. Their game night is going to be on the last Friday of every month, and this month is no different. It is on the 27th. iPlay will not be able to make it, but we are still looking for a few lobby hosts. So if you are a frequent flyer for our game nights and don't have the role, please let me know. If you're listening to this now and I haven't talked to you in Discord yet, feel free. I'll be asking a few people coming up in the next couple days if you don't catch the show anyways, but we'd love to see you there. Coaches, players, both strong and weak, please feel welcome and come to our game night. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, game night is super fun. I'm kind of bummed I'm gonna get to miss it. I'm going to my friend's wedding this weekend. We're going to be out the whole weekend with Kristen, my significant other. Um, and I'm kind of sad because I'm missing a lot of things. Not only am I missing game night, but I'm also missing the Overwatch League Grand Finals. Although I'm really happy for him. He's been one of my really good friends for a long time now. So, of course, I'm going to be there for him. That's how much I like you, man. I'm skipping Overwatch League Finals and game night to be at your wedding.
Yeah, well, got to do what you got to do, man. We also have another announcement, which is the typical stuff for Patreon. We are still doing our coaching sessions at the 250 Patreon level, so platinum and above. If you're at those ranks in the Patreon, not in the ladder, you can join our coaching sessions once a month with Andres or myself at any rank. We do coaching, and we're gonna have a lot of fun. I got one more tomorrow for the closing out of the month, and we got a whole new clean slate for next month if you want to schedule and you don't know about your times working out because you work third shift, or maybe you like mornings instead of the evenings and are worried that you won't be able to get a slot. Have no fear, we have 2 time zones here. We can hook you up, okay? And we'll get that going. My wife is cringing at me in the other room, by the way, at that statement.
Don't worry, I'm cringing over here
we
too.
better get to the PTR changes before this gets real bad. So let's talk about the PTR, folks. So we're just going to jump right into this. This is not actual live servers yet, but this is 1.41 for those of you keeping track of numbers. On September 24th was the launch day, so this is actually just yesterday. This is pretty fresh content for the podcast sphere. So let's get into it and start with D.Va. iPlay, what happened to D.Va?
All right, let's get into these changes. Yeah, the first one, D.Va, probably one of the most changed heroes in the history of Overwatch, is getting yet one more change.
No doubt.
Defense matrix, to no surprise. The regeneration rate has been increased from 12.5% to 16% per second. So a small little increase in your regeneration. So you'll get your defense matrix a little bit more often or sooner. And also the generation begins, or the moment when it starts regenerating has been lowered from 1 second to 0.75 seconds. So overall, I think that the defense matrix is going to feel a little bit more responsive. You'll be able to regenerate it a little bit faster after you have engaged with it, and it'll regenerate at a faster rate. So overall, even though it seems small, I think it's a big change for Diva. It might allow her to actually keep up with a lot of the barrier and spam damage that is being played right now with Sigma, with Orisa, with Reaper. So overall, a win for her. It's a small change, though. I don't know if this change alone is going to bring Diva back into the meta, but with some of the other changes that we've seen right now, maybe we will.
The interesting thing about this is they are 2 changes, and even though they look like they affect the same, they do affect the same skill. The same skill of defense matrix is still getting that slight uptuning twice. So it is a little bit bigger than these small numbers are really going to reflect, because you're going to get the regeneration starting quicker, so it's going to happen more often when you're not using it. And then you're going to get, you're going to get more juice for your wait time.
Yeah, you'll
so that is
regenerate
something
more
interesting
in the same amount of time.
Exactly. So you may have what we call uptime, or more time that this ability is available to you, and you'll also have more of the meter yourself to use it. So it's kind of uptime plus meter use, which is a really interesting dynamic of how they're approaching this skill, which has historically been her strongest skill. So we're gonna see what happens with Diva with this particular impact. Maybe not right now because of this change, but this could definitely be something that could overtune, undertune this ability in relationship to all of the other changes. Like Andres was saying, the context of the patch is really, really important for stuff like this. Moving forward into another big change, Orisa got another nerf by them slapping another second on the cooldown for the barrier. Now, from what I've understood about this particular change, is it is, yes, a good change to the barriers and not having as much uptime. However, the side note is that a lot of the players are complaining in the upper tiers, aka the pro scene and the GM players, that not touching Fortify is the biggest issue right now. So we will see what happens with Orisa being kind of the key offender with the barrier bunker meta problem, paired with Sigma's barrier or Ryan's barrier, however you want to look at it. But that's just my opinion. I still think that this is a good change. I think that this is going to be felt for most tiers of play, especially people not like min-maxing the barriers and min-maxing uptime with their Sigmas together. That's when you really see how oppressive this kind of a thing is. And them nerfing both of the barriers a little bit, I think is a safe bet on Blizzard's side, more than it is them just saying, you know what, no one needs barriers. Ryan Zarya all the way, always. Like them kind of slowly tuning this back, I think, is a smart move on their point, regardless if the meta doesn't change at all or whatever. That's just my opinion. I don't know. What do you think about this iPlay?
Well, right now barriers are in a very interesting spot. The thing that makes Orisa's barrier so powerful is that she gets a new one. Well, before it was every 8 seconds, now it's every 9, and now it's going to be every 10 seconds. It's still a very powerful ability in the sense that if you're able to buy your barrier enough time in those 10 seconds, it doesn't matter how much damage it has been put into it or how many resources or what has been tried, you can just put out a fresh new barrier. And you think about this, some of the other barrier heroes don't have that drawback. Sigma, or sorry, she doesn't have the drawback that some of the other heroes have, which Sigma and Reinhardt, if they put their barrier out there, they're losing their barrier. Even if they put it away, they have to wait some time for it to regenerate. They can't just keep putting out a new shield every 10 seconds, right? They're limited to the one that they have already. So focusing the shield for Sigma and Rein actually makes sense. You can deny them of that cooldown. You can eventually break it so that they don't even have a barrier and they're completely naked for a while, right? But with Orisa, it's not quite the same. You have to do it incredibly fast with Orisa to even get a window of opportunity where you can shoot through. The problem that's happening right now is that that window of opportunity is getting covered by Sigma. When the Orisa's barrier dies, Sigma can quickly redeploy a barrier in front of them and keep the cover and just hold out for a few more seconds until Orisa has a completely fresh new barrier that that then the enemy team has to put a ton of resources again into, making
Correct.
it sometimes not even worth it. I think we were playing the other day with you, Rob, and you were sort of like learning Reaper, and we are playing against some better guys. So we were kind of pointing it out, like, hey, if you have to focus a barrier, don't even worry about Orisa. Just focus on Sigma, since it's the only one that is worth breaking in some
Covering the
cases.
weakness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing about this that's kind of coming up, I think, right now is the catch-22 of creating interesting and differing tanks with kind of having the same barrier thing going on in their kit, but like just doing it a different way, a la Sigma, Orisa, and Reinhardt. But doing so allows you a whole new slew of issues with regards to balance, right? Because now you have Orisa kind of operating on a completely different axis to how people interpret dealing with barriers in any stretch of competitive format. You've got them saying, okay, this barrier, we just got to pressure them over time to kind of reduce the usableness of the barrier or just break it. And then you have this window of time, right? With Orisa, it's like, I have to break this as soon as it's up, as fast as possible, so that my window to kill is much larger. And because of that reason, Sigma basically weaving in and out of the Orisa, the shindig there, kind of exacerbates the issue of what's going on with her berry, especially if her berry gets to stick around longer than her cooldown,
It's
then
which happens
it's really
very
oppressive.
often actually. A lot
Right.
of times you get your cooldown back without your first barrier having died. It's still up, still out there in the world, and you have it again. So it's very easy for you to hang out with your barrier. As soon as it gets destroyed, you basically just redeploy it at that point. And I think that with barriers, what it's intended is that they buy you some time, right? As a team, you can utilize the barriers to contest an area for some time, and hopefully within that time you capitalize and you kill the enemy team, or you kill a few of the heroes to the point where they have to disengage. But eventually those barriers will wane off, right? And you can't just sit there in that area forever. As long as the enemy is putting pressure on you, those barriers will eventually break, and hopefully you will have capitalized by that point. What is happening
Right.
right now though is that that point never comes, right? The barriers just keep replenishing themselves to the point where it's this constant cycle of them coming out, and games have devolved almost into both teams sometimes just standing right in front of each other, and nobody will kill each other because there's so many barriers. There's some funny clips out there of people trying to kill like this one stationary bastion which survives for like 30 seconds
30
because
full seconds. Yeah.
there is so much barriers and
Double
block,
barriers and pockets and armor and
and he's just standing there still. So many things fall on this guy, but half of it gets blocked, the other half gets healed. And it's a funny way to play Overwatch, I would say.
yeah, and I think that this type of stuff is, let me even put it this way, like the way I've looked at this barrier, what the people are calling barrier watch right now for this meta, is that it doesn't ask a whole lot of players to perform it. You know, like you can min max it to the point where it's really, really oppressive. But like even if it's not like really powerful, or even if it's not really done properly, like it's super easy to pull off at like lower ranks. And so this is one of the rare metas where even just picking the same heroes that the top players are doing, you can kind of emulate pretty close to the same thing. And because of this, like bronze to grandmaster players are getting really, really upset with kind of how the game is being played, how it's not exciting, how they feel like it's boring, or how other heroes that would never have any reason of being popular outside of this particular niche are really, really strong. And that's why I
Yeah,
think that this needs a major adjustment.
and I do think that maybe barriers need to be looked at. I think that the meta that has evolved has been interesting in and of itself. To be
Right.
honest, having Reaper back has been nice for a change.
Okay.
We get to see a little bit of May. We get to see some Doomfist, and I get it. I get it. Some people these are not the funnest hero to play against, right? When you're playing against May, when you're playing against Doomfist, they freeze you, they one-shot kill you with their combos. It's not the ideal way to play it. But that being said, it's interesting that now we get into this meta because it's territory that we've never been to before, right? It's like the first time Bunker has taken over like this. And it is, to me at least, fun and interesting discovering what you can do in this kind of meta. It's been kind of cool playing Reaper in that style where you're just what you always have been intended to be, a tank buster that sometimes is not even concerned about some of the other DPS. You're just winning the front line for your team almost every time. He has the toolkit to do it. He feels really powerful and really strong right now. So that being said, I personally have been enjoying this meta as is. I know, for example, our good friend Jay Lee is not very happy because he's a badass Ana. He's incredible at Ana. And he doesn't get to play Ana very much in this meta because with all the barriers, her nades, her cooldowns, her healing is just not as effective.
Value just doesn't exist very much.
Yeah, Moira
Kinda
is
just
a
play
lot
Moira.
more valued in this meta. And, that's not to say that you can't play some of the other heroes. It all depends on what your games are looking like. If the other team
Right.
is not playing double barrier, or even if they're playing double barrier but are not playing it correctly, right? Their Sigma and their Arista are really split, their Reaper's not staying with their front line, you can still get away with a ton of other stuff, especially in the ladder. But once you start finding those teams that are sticking together, that are playing the double barrier correctly, you have that Reaper front line, that Doomfist diving all the time. Then yeah, you're kind of right now you are being forced into those kind of same heroes in order to keep up.
Okay, so with that, let's talk about the other two tank changes. The first one is interesting because I like that they're including a Roadhog in the roundup here for looks like basically all the tanks at large were getting looked at besides Reinhardt and Zarya, which I thought was pretty interesting. Reinhardt and Zarya got left behind, but the rest of them got changes. But we got Roadhog is getting an ammo boost by 1. Roadhog can shoot 1 more shot, so you're not like in this thing where you're like shoot, 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 reload. Now you get 1 more shot before you can figure it out. This seems to me like just yet another option outside of playing Sigma with Orisa or Orisa with Sigma, depending on how you look at it. You can, or double barrier, for example. You basically get another barrier buster that you can do. You give Roadhog another extra tool that maybe he can help barrier bust a bit better. I don't think there's much more besides that you can really say, but the next is Sigma has 3 different changes. The first seems really necessary, which is the kinetic grasp. Kinetic grasp is kind of his diva matrix where he like absorbs energy and creates a shield. That will no longer break hook and whip shot from Brigitte. So hook from Roadhog, Brigitte's whip shot. These abilities will actually still hit Sigma and not generate any resource for him and like do damage. This is really, really important because this is basically, if you compare it 1-to-1 to Diva, these abilities still hit her, and there's no reason why they shouldn't hit Sigma. The next one is Gravitic Flux. Gravitic Flux, high gravity effect, duration reduced from 1.2 to 0.9 seconds. So this gives you about 1/3 of a second longer of when you basically get that hyper slow effect when you get slammed down with the ultimate. It doesn't last that long anymore, which was, it felt really annoying, to be honest. And I thought that that was kind of like something that should have been removed from the ultimate, to be honest. But them reducing it is something that I'll just have to kind of test and see. And I think Andres is maybe in the same camp here for that one. But the last up, and then I'll have Andres kind of do all of his roundup in the comments here. But we did talk about it ad nauseum, is barrier. The 3 barrier changes. The regeneration rate is reduced from 175 to 150 per second. So the regeneration of getting his barrier back once it's been down or destroyed is slower. Then they're going to give him a cooldown for recalling the barrier. So once you pull the barrier back into his arm, he can't redeploy it for a full second. So you do have to wait to put it back out. There's none of this instant pop shield. And then on top of that, they will now, since you're waiting a full second, they remove the 0.2 cast time, kind of the whole stick your arm out and then the barrier goes kind of animation. It doesn't exist anymore. He'll do the animation, but the barrier's coming out instantly now.
Yeah, these are a lot of interesting changes. We also have some questions in the chat asking about if all these changes are gonna come down on Orisa a little harder than they are in Sigma. I think that overall, these changes are targeted more towards Sigma than anything else. I think that Orisa is still in a really good spot right now, survivability wise. She might seem easier to kill sometimes than Sigma is. I think it's mostly based on playstyle. I think that an Orisa, well played, is probably the hardest tank to kill right now in the entire metagame, especially because she gets a free out of a lot of things that would kill other tanks, like Gravitic Flux from Sigma, like Pull from another Orisa, Hook, Shatter. All these things that would disable most tanks, Orisa is sort of invulnerable to as long as you're playing it the right way and you are paying attention to your resilience. What am I thinking about here, Rob? The ability
Fortify?
that makes fortify. Thank you. I don't know why I blanked out on that word.
I was trying to see where you were going with this, and I'm not tracking.
Your resilience. I mean, it does make you very resilient, so I guess I'm in the right track.
Yeah, it does.
There. That being said, though, a lot of these changes, her barrier being a bit longer, and now Sigma changes too. His kinetic grasp no longer blocking Roadhog hooks or the ability to block a Brigitte whip shot. I think this is huge because one of the reasons Roadhog got pulled out of the meta was because of Sigma, his incredible ability to just stop his hook almost anywhere, not only with his shield, but with the kinetic grasp. A good Sigma would never get hooked by Roadhog, and a good Orisa.
Or would he try to position himself in such an easy space to be hit if the Roadhog hook was actually a threat?
Well, that was the worst part of it. Sigmas could actually play incredibly aggressive towards Roadhog because they're so confident in them not getting hooked. Especially if you're paying attention to the hook and kinetic grasp, all that. Like the Roadhog will never be able to. And then Orisa, you can't hook her either. With Fortify and her ability to stay behind barriers, pulling her and hooking her is almost out of the question. So at that point, Roadhog is completely thrown out of the meta. It's like, hey, the reason you were brought, the halt hook combo, no longer works that well against both of these main tanks, and we're not getting any value out of it. So we're gonna change it.
Not even bad in the first place. He was seeing a ton of play before Sigma was even a hero, right? Like he was the default pairing for Orisa. Like that's what we talked about with the Clockwork.
Yeah, he actually still does incredibly well against all of the rest of the roster. The reason he's not getting played that much anymore is because Sigma has basically overshadowed him in almost every aspect. Now, with this, you can actually hook Sigmas now. And because his deployment of the barrier takes some time, you can actually time it. If he deploys the barrier and you're in a position where you can just kind of like sidestep the barrier or just go through the barrier and hook him, now that's a possibility. If he gets halted and he doesn't have his barrier up, you can hook him now too. So a little bit more counterplay there. Sigmas has to watch out his back a little bit more. He can also get booped by Brigitte now too, which adds a little bit more usability to Brig, which could use a little bit of help now.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
At this point, why not?
Yeah, and his Gravitic Flux got nerfed a little bit. I think that ultimate is the whole package. It allows you to fly and reposition. It's a huge kind of crowd control effect. It's a huge, insane amount of damage. It's really powerful. So I honestly can see them nerfing the duration of the stun a little bit.
I mean, I think long term, you could even see this ability just completely going away. The whole high gravity effect thing just disappearing. I think that's kind of just a minor thing that
you're saying, like when they land.
Yeah, after they land, like taking that crazy amount of damage, I think should be enough. But I also could see a world where they just remove the damage entirely and increase the CC just to make it crazy.
Yeah,
but the CC is pretty long in the first place. So
let's talk about. It's in an interesting place because it is a huge ultimate. Yeah. But honestly, a lot of the time you get maybe one kill, two if you're lucky out of it, and that is if the enemy team doesn't have anything to react to it, right? Like the Reaper doesn't raid form out of it, the Orisa doesn't. Um,
Well, I guess I'm not really. I'm saying like more thinking more forward looking here, because like for now with the given meta, it doesn't really get a whole lot of value. But like in the future, where you can set that thing up with a lot of other ultimates in different metas, with different heroes. I'm thinking of like regular like divas or like setting up a roadhog with it, where the roadhog's like knocking them back and into the flux, and then they kind of take half of their hit points and then they drop. That could be really, really bad. There's all kinds of crazy stuff where the combos could get a little nuts depending on how metas end up shaking out. That being said, this is this super future proofing type thing that I'm thinking of, but I really like Sigma, so either way, I'm gonna try to play him as a tank because he's fun. The next is your boy Winston is back in the patch notes, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome the monkey back. Let's go. The barrier projector's health is now duration. Sorry, not the health. The duration is increased to 9 seconds. They're giving you 3 more seconds of uptime, which is not like really that consequential, until you realize that the health is also up by a full 100 more hit points on that health bar. That is gigantic. I am so hyped to play Winston once a lot of this stuff kind of shifts. I love playing Winston. He's my favorite tank of all of the tanks in the roster, and I cannot wait to play him again just to test this change out.
Yeah, definitely some love to Winston and Diva. Maybe they're trying to bring the possibility of dive again. I think that dive would actually be a fairly decent composition against some of the teams that are getting played right now. And I mean, being able to dive in and out can be really helpful against guys like Sigma. Although, diving at Moira is not the best thing right now. Diving at Lucio is also not the best thing. So there's not a lot of juicy targets to dive. But that being said, it would be nice if some of it came back, especially for maps that have a lot of verticality. I think that would be pretty cool. That being said, to me, this looks like a little bit of just power creep coming into Overwatch in general, right? It's been happening slowly, I think, since the beginning of the game. And right now we're at a point where barriers, for example, are so strong that they're the way to be played, right? And rather than bringing maybe some of those heroes a little bit down, we're bringing everyone else up, which is sort of what happened in the GOATS meta, right? In the GOATS meta, triple healing and triple tanking was so strong that we ended up buffing a lot of other heroes. For example, Orisa. Or the reason Orisa is so powerful right now is that back in the GOATS meta, she got a ton of really juicy buffs that once the GOATS meta went away, made Orisa stand out quite a bit. Likewise with Reaper. Reaper was sort of the answer that they wanted to take to the GOATS meta. So rather than nerfing some of that healing, some of that other stuff, they buffed Reaper, and now voila, who's dominating.
And I think that's a good point that you brought up, Andres, because what's going on now is this kind of goes all the way back to what we talked about at the top of the show, getting another patch more than we would have anticipated prior because of the 222 rollout. I think there's a lot of unintended effects from that, plus the patch change on top of that. So I think that the frequency of patches is going to be a bit higher for like the first maybe even 6 months of this. Just to kind of rebalance a bit, kind of get their bearings and kind of get an idea of where they are, even with the hero rollouts, the new hero rollouts like Sigma, what we're getting at BlizzCon, etc., that type of thing. I think it's going to be a good thing to see this many patch notes, but if maybe you are a newer player or maybe you're a seasoned player that just doesn't play a whole lot, this could be a bit overwhelming to have this many patch notes, I think, hitting your table like this fast. But just keep in mind that I think at large, the patches or the metas, the things that kind of develop are going to be a little bit slower until they kind of get it back into a little bit faster, like because the PTRs are coming out. All right, let's talk about Baptiste next.
Well, before we move on, to me it's interesting where this is gonna end up in, right? Because we're buffing Winston, we're buffing Diva, and so on. But what happens a day where maybe things are getting out of hand and Winston and Diva are not cutting it, Dive is not really coming back, and they're like, you know what? Okay, we're finally going to nerf Orisa. So now we nerf Orisa, But it turns out that Winston and Diva are not now incredibly great. And if you're not playing Bunker and you're playing against Dive, Dive is incredibly powerful because now Winston has a bigger shield, can take more damage, lasts longer. Diva has a better defense matrix, and maybe playing maybe Zen and Anna is like impossible just because those heroes are so powerful, right? And I'm just speculating over here, but it's kind of like the unintended side effect of just buffing everyone else to match the new current level of power, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I'm interested to see like in the future if this stuff kind of gets out of hand to the point where they're just like, you know what? All the barriers, everyone loses some health, everyone goes slower. We're gonna get rid of everything. Like if they just do a whole house cleaning thing,
Well,
I'd
because
be very interested to see what that
that's what
patch
it's
looks like.
happening. If you look at like Overwatch when it first came out and Overwatch now, it's vastly different. The pace, the amount of damage that is put out there, the amount of barriers and shields that you can put out there, sometimes even the amount of healing and burst healing that you can
Hmm.
put out. All of it has been increased across the board slowly over time. And now we're getting to a point where like that is now the game gets played with that pace, with that amount of barriers, and like people have gotten used to it at this point. But at what point do we say, okay, that is too much barriers, or like, okay, that is too much damage? At one point,
Yeah,
are we
when do
gonna
you
have?
intervene? You know?
Yeah, are they gonna have to like do what you said, like maybe bring it down a little bit more, or is Overwatch just going to be getting more and more insane until at one point where it's just gonna be like wild damage barriers and healing all over
Yeah.
the place?
It's kind of a bit much for a light show. You know what I mean? Like there's all of these abilities and spells slinging around, and then you got the barriers, and there's like 15,000 different light shows going on at the same time, and you're also trying to kill someone. It's
Somebody
really, really hard.
somebody posted a picture the other day that I thought it was really funny. It was like there was like six ultimates going on at the same time and some other heroes like doing like their own abilities, and somebody just took like a screenshot from like a replay angle where you could see like
Hmm.
everything happening. And honestly, it was insane to
It's
see.
chaos.
Yeah, it was just chaos. It was like a Symmetra shield across the battlefield, and one like more ulting. Then it was like a gravity flux from a Sigma.
Sigma.
And there was like five heroes flying in the air. There was like it was just like what you saw. It was just utter chaos. You were just like,
It's
oh
what you
my
thought
god.
Star Wars is supposed to look like.
It looked cool though. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, we're getting
Yeah.
to a point where like Overwatch is getting a little crazy.
Especially if you're colorblind, it can get a bit much. Let's get into Baptiste here. Immortality field, health decreased from 250 to 200. Now, I just have to say, I don't do this very often, but when we had Baptiste released and we talked about this ability, I was like, this ability is not going to stay 250 forever. Like, it can't. It's way too strong. 200 is a good sweet spot, and I support this change. Seal of approval.
Yeah, Immortality Field finally coming down, just a tad. We all agree it's an incredibly powerful ability. It does have some counterplay. It's
But
not
because it
like
can't be headshot was my big argument on that.
well, where are you gonna headshot it? All of it?
That's what I mean. It's like any hero that has 200 hit points, a lot of the information of how you destroy them or kill people,
Oh,
they
yeah,
can
yeah,
be
yeah.
headshot.
Right,
So
right,
a lot
right,
of the
right.
pellets or whatever can do it. This hitbox is super small and you can't headshot it. It's just pure normal body shot damage.
I see what you mean. Yeah, now it's a little bit faster to focus down, which is needed in a world where two barriers are a thing and it's already really hard to get damage in. Having immortality field thrown into that mix just makes things even more aggravating. So I think it's a good change
Yeah.
given the current climate.
Okay, now this is one of the only two changes that Andres and I talked about in the pre-show, and super confusing. So we're gonna try to hopefully break this down for you easy. Lucio has three changes, and they're all related. Okay, every single change that Lucio has right now that we're gonna talk about has to do with speed. Okay, so the first one is crossfade. This is when you switch between abilities or your standard passive that you chose. The speed passive, the speed boost, is up 5% from 20 to 25. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, we have to go through all of them first. Wall Ride is last. So we'll go to Amp It Up. This is the boosting of the current song during speed only. The amp goes up 10% now, higher than it did before. So now from 50%, we're now at 60% of a boost. So the standard 25 and the boost is 60. Before it was 20 and 50, okay? Now it's 25, 60. And then to compensate, the Wall Ride has been reduced for the speed buff from 40 to 30. Okay, so the amp timing for Lucio and the normal timing for Lucio himself is up a net of 5%. Okay. But the team buff, your allies that you're buffing, is up 5%, and the amp is up 10%. So just keep that in mind. This is a team-focused buff for Lucio. This is not an individual thing. And I have seen a couple reports from Lucio players that have already, at the top level on Twitter, have posted that the Wall Ride change is basically moot. It's the same feeling Lucio that you have right now. The rollouts don't really change. What you can hit with your wall rides, how fast you're moving, how the feel is, it's all the same. So don't worry too much about how Lucio feels. This is how your team is going to feel, how good you are when you're playing Lucio, because you're going to get a little bit more of a boost from him.
Yeah, these are interesting changes, to be honest. I don't know exactly the reasoning behind some of this. I can speculate, but there's not a clear reason for me. One of the things I've noticed is that for certain heroes, if you sped up, if you amped it up while you're in a speed song and you were wall riding, you would still leave some of them behind. So I don't know if this change sort of addresses that a little bit, where Lucio's speed will now match the speed of his boosted allies a little bit more, so it's easier to keep up as you're doing it. He himself is a little bit slower as he's grinding through walls, but like you said, I don't think that it has been a significant change. Now his playstyle hasn't changed too much there. His teammates will feel a little bit more speed, 10% more when it's boosted. So it's going from 50% to 60. So that's going to be nice. I don't know if is this intended maybe to sort of incentivize dive a little bit more, give those heroes a little bit more room to move faster. I think that he still fits really good in the meta game right now. Double barriers are still going to take advantage of him.
Standard death ball to kind of maybe have an option instead of dive. Like if you want to run the Ryan Zarya, I know Anders and I tried that comp against a double barrier.
Oh yeah, the Ryan Zarya might actually benefit quite a bit.
You just move in past the barriers and brawl. You can do that. Yeah, interesting tactics here for the Lucio change, and I really like this one because this one seems at first kind of out of left field. Like, why are we doing this with Lucio right now? Because he seems really strong and decent already. But, you know, like Andres said, maybe a little bit more quality of life, maybe a little bit incentive to try him out with different comps into the barriers or with the barriers. You never know.
At this point, it really seems that they just changed Lucio's speed to match the meta. Oh, we're in this meta right now. Change Lucio's speed. Oh, we're now in this meta right now. Oh, we gotta change Lucio's speed a little bit more, because his speed has been changed basically every meta.
All I want, Blizzard, is one more support hero that does buff team speed. Please, for the love of God, have another option outside of Lucio to play for speed, okay? I don't want identity taken away from Lucio.
Maybe just an individual boost. Speed. Adrenaline rush, and you give it to somebody. Psh.
Either way, I think that speed is incredibly powerful, so they have to be super careful. And I think that if they did give speed in Overwatch to another hero in the support category, there has to be some sort of non-stacking buff. You know what I mean? Like, they have to address it in that way for it to really be balanced. Next up is Mercy, who is very interestingly getting a buff to her extra beams during Valkyrie, so that if a target runs a check, so for example, if I'm beaming Andres and he's in front of a barrier on Reaper, okay, and I'm in the sky, regardless of where he is, I don't lose my quote unquote line of sight of him if he goes through a barrier. The beam and eye of Mercy is connected to Andres on the other side of the barrier regardless, because I can still see him. It's not a line of sight thing. Okay. But the extra things from Valk will run a kind of a check to see what other allies are within the vicinity, within range, to also get the buff that your primary target is. And the previous Valkyrie would run a check where it wouldn't let you go through the second beam attachment to an ally that was behind an enemy barrier. So now you can, regardless, it's the same rules apply to the beam, whether you're the primary or the secondary target during Valkyrie, you can still hit your allies. This is a great change, especially giving her a little bit more viability when a meta makes her really, really difficult to get value out of that ultimate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think again a change to incentivize a little bit of dive. Now, together, we are actually kind of seeing a little bit of a trend here, right? Some nerfs to barriers, and then some buffs to Winston, to Diva, to Mercy, all to kind of allow them to better engage, right? The Winston now has a bigger shield that lasts for a little bit longer, so buys him a little bit more time in all of that chaos.
Yep.
Matrix from Diva regenerates faster and is a little bit more responsive in that sense. So again, you can probably mitigate more damage in the same amount of time that you could before. And now with Valkyrie, being able to heal through barriers is basically a way of saying, okay, once we have Valkyrie and Mercy, which actually is a great hero for dive, one of the best healers to keep up with the dive composition. Now when she has Valkyrie up, we can seriously engage because the barriers don't matter anymore, right? Or Mercy will be able to have a healing beam basically on all of us as long as we dive together.
Next up is Moira. We got Biotic Grasp self-healing reduced from 30 to 20 per second. So this is a pretty big change because this is a per second change. So immediately when you use the ability, and over the course of time, you're going to be gaining less health through this. So this is going to help have, again, yet another section of counterplay to a very popular meta of using barriers and having your Moiras camp around it. She doesn't have as much sustain anymore. So you're going to have to really work hard. And if the Moira goes down, she can go down easier. And if the Moira goes down in Barrier Watch, it's real tough to kind of survive because she has that much output.
Moira has a ton of survivability right now, and she heals herself for a lot. It's actually really hard to kill her sometimes when you're just, 1v1 versus her. You usually need a little bit of extra poke damage from somebody else to really finish her off, or get her with like a one-shot, like a Hanzo arrow or a Widowmaker.
Yeah.
But again, those heroes are not getting played a lot because it's really hard to play Widowmaker in the 2-barrier meta. So yeah, I think that this gives a little bit more of a solution to be able to kill Moira. And I think this has spawned too from a couple of memes in the community of Moiras just standing in front of each other, like damaging each other and basically not dying because they're both just healing each other.
Yep. Because their damage output is so low and also their healing is much higher. So it's kind of
they're just basically standing in front of each other, like, just
damaging. Speaking of durability and survivability, Doomfist got a nerf. The best defense or his ability to regain shields by hitting his abilities. The shield that you get, or the shield that you are gained per hit is reduced from 35 to 30. Not a large amount, but it does add up when you're hitting multiple abilities. So if you're able to punch and then uppercut and then slam, that's 3 different iterations of health. That's 15 total hit points that you're gaining, or getting into the bank of the decay, starting higher at a higher pool. So I venture to say that this little nerf is probably a bit inconsequential to me. Like just thinking like through 5 health, 10 health, maybe in general, because not really a whole lot. But I don't know, Andres, what do you think about this particular thing? Because he also had a nerf to the rocket punch where the max charge time to where he gets to his charge on his punch is increased. So it takes him about 0.4 seconds longer from 1 to 1.4 seconds to charge his punch.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I don't really think it's that big of a
So
change.
to be fair, to me, these are very delicate changes. I think that they're really trying to be careful here. I don't think they want Doomfist to be out of the meta or unusable. This sounds to me like they like where Doomfist is right now, but they do understand that he's very powerful, and he honestly sticks out like a sore thumb in this meta more than ever because he can be so effective over some of the other DPS heroes. So when you actually run into a good Doomfist, he seems so oppressive, and even though you're going some of the other heroes, your output just doesn't seem to be the same. And sometimes it's not, it might not be necessarily because Doomfist is just busted. It's just because his abilities are really effective right now against everyone else, while most of the other DPS seem a little bit powerless against all these barriers. Um, so I don't think he needs a big nerf, but Doomfist is a hero that is already threading the needle a lot of the times. When you go in, when you're rocket punching and everything, even at the top level of Overwatch, you tend to come out really low or barely dead. And honestly, dying as Doomfist, if you're not good with your abilities, is fairly easy. It's actually quite easy to kill a Doomfist that is not using his abilities correctly and punish him. Now, with this change, the shields are slightly less. So it might mean that the Doomfist might have to think twice before going in. I think that it's such a small nerf that I think for the most part, Doomfist will still be played sort of the same, but you might be able to punish him a little bit more. Cumulatively, getting 5 less shields every time you hit does add over time. And throughout the whole match, this might be 500 less health that you end up getting,
Mm.
which, might make a difference.
The
As far
punch
as
time is a much larger change, though. I have
yeah,
to
as far
say
as the
that's a
rocket
big
punch
one.
goes, this is great. I think one of the worst parts with Doomfist is being like maybe like a tracer and blinking behind him and him barely loading his rocket punch, just like tapping it basically, and still being able to hit you for an insane amount of damage. I think that this will lower that amount. You're gonna have to load it a little bit faster, or sorry, hold on to it a
Preload
little
it.
bit. Yeah, preload it a little bit more before you let it go in order to deal the same amount of damage that you were dealing before, which I think is good. I think it's such a powerful ability that I would honestly give it even more time. Let it load up to 2 seconds to get the maximum distance.
And this affects more than just like it says max charge increased, but keep in mind the charge rate affects every aspect of this ability. It affects how far you're going. It affects how much damage you're doing over the how much charge you have. It's also affecting kind of your movement depending on how far you can get. Because a lot of times, if you watch really high tier Doomfist play, like in even Masters players, a lot of times they will just do the tap. They'll just tap it and get the quick punch because that's all they need. And the minimum size, it doesn't really change a whole lot. So that aspect of Doomfist is kind of unaffected in the minimum damage. But the change is that anything after minimum up until max is just going to take longer or deal less right out of the gate.
Hmm.
So just keep that in mind.
And I
All
do
right.
believe that the distance that you get knocked back or you get hit is still the same,
Yeah,
regardless of how much charge you have. So even the
exactly.
minimum punch was already doing an insane amount of damage, especially if you slam
Hmm.
somebody against the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. Now here's a kind of a complicated change again. But this one's coming from Sombra. This is about the translocator. So we're going to be kind of key with how we describe this here. So, first of all, the cooldown was increased from 4 seconds to 6 seconds. And second, it says the cooldown now begins immediately upon deploying the beacon or if it is killed by an enemy. Now, Andres, what does deploying the beacon mean?
So that's the same question that I had. I think we clarified that at the beginning of the show when we were talking about it. But deploy means when it actually lands and sticks to a surface, right? When you throw it and it deploys on the ground, you kind of hear like this little sounds like a ching. It just loads up,
Mm-hmm.
and your translocator is basically ready to go. So when it deploys, that's when the cooldown is going to start now, rather than when after you use it or after you destroy it, which is how it currently works.
Yeah, so if you use it, that technically counts as it being destroyed.
Yeah,
So
if you
keep that in mind too.
translocate back, that's what we mean by using it.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about this is the aspect of being able to bank this cooldown so that you can use it twice. So if you remember when Junkrat had his changes, or even initially when he only had one of the um,
Concussive
explosive
mines.
mines, he could set up one and then wait for the cooldown. And then once the cooldown was up, he could explode and jump, and then he could do it again in the middle of the air. And now he has two, he can bank one and then go jump, 1, 2. So you can get it twice in the air and once on the ground. It's the same thing for Sombra now. You deploy it, you set it up somewhere, and then you can wait 6 seconds or wait a couple seconds, maybe like 3 to 4 or 5, and get where the thing's going to be ready again. And the second you translocate, you can pitch the next one and then use it again. So you can cover an incredible amount of time if you plan, or an incredible amount of space if you plan properly. And Andres and I were talking about, okay, so how does this work with EMP setups? Because if you want to set this up, maybe you can throw it super high, and then by the time it hits the ground, you can translocate and then translocate out. But because it says deploy and not thrown, that's where the language is important. Because Andres was thinking that, like, maybe I can throw it high and wait for it by the time it hits the ground, get a couple seconds on that, and then go in for my EMP and then get out.
Yeah, well, right now, one of the main uses of the translocator is so you can position right in the middle of the enemy team right before you EMP, right? It's hard to get in the middle of the team or in a position where you can catch everyone with your EMP. So the easiest way to do it is sometimes to aim your translocator right at the middle of them, throw yourself EMP, and catch them all, right? Then you have about 4 seconds where you need to fight, or hopefully your team engages with you then, so they buy you those 4 seconds, and then you can translocate out again. That's kind of how it currently works. With this one, you are gonna be stuck there for 2 more seconds because unfortunately the cooldown doesn't start until it's deployed, right? But most of the time you're not even letting it deploy when you're trying to do a move like this one, right? You're just teleporting midair and trying to catch everyone that you can. So now you gotta watch out for that because you're gonna have 2 more seconds that you're gonna have to wait when you do that, unless you somehow are able to put your translocator somewhere in the middle of them without them noticing. Then you can actually wait 6 seconds before you translocate EMP, and now you immediately have your cooldown. So I think it just changes slightly the way that you think about Sombra and some of the possibilities of engagement and disengagement that you have. Now, if you set your translocator like you did before in a safe location and you go harass the enemy team, you will have another translocator. So even if you destroy it or you change your mind, you might be able to redeploy it immediately after that, which, it's a sort of a welcome change. So I think it has some pros and cons. Definitely changes the style and the way that you think about the translocator.
It could be interesting too. I was talking in the pre-show about it, where let's say you're playing Anubis on attack on point A, where you kind of just go in and then you throw your translocator on that high ground where no one is, and then you go in the back line, and by the time you've got in the back line, you're starting to harass them to get your ultimate. You can shoot them to harass them, translocate out to the high ground, drop down from the high ground, EMP, and then throw your translocator and get out. So you have this really quick uptime if you've got a plan for where both of these translocators are going to be used ahead of time. It's that chess match that you can enjoy on Sombra a bit more now. All right, let's talk about Symmetra. This is really, really big. Photon Barrier. This is the ultimate. Duration reduced from 15 to 12 seconds. Thank goodness. This is way too long. 15 seconds long uptime for an ultimate.
It is.
And the health is now 4,000. You might actually see someone be able to destroy the barrier now. 4,000 health, man.
I actually have seen this happen several times now with the bunker meta, especially if you have a Bastion and a Reaper and your entire team decides to actually shoot at the barrier. You can actually kill this fairly fast. Now,
But
Most
now
people
you
won't
can
do
do it
it.
with non-bastion potentially.
Potentially, yeah. Now you only have
Potentially.
12 seconds to do it. So honestly, it is still like a huge amount of resources that you have to put into this barrier very fast, which most of the time you don't even have the opportunity to do so, right? Because the enemy team deploys it in the middle of the engagement, and at that point you have to choose. Do you damage
Right.
heroes or do you damage Symmetra's shield? And if you're damaging Symmetra's shield, chances are the enemy team is pretty happy about that. Um,
And
that
honestly,
being
this ult is still freaking insane. Like it's really good. So
Yeah,
don't
it's
worry.
it's still really good. I'm glad that it got a nerf. Honestly, I thought that it was too good because aside from Sombra, there was not much counterplay that you could do to this ultimate, right? Aside from a Sombra EMPing and erasing your barrier right after you deployed it, um, there wasn't much you could do. Now, if you do have a really bursty team like Bunker Team, and they haven't completely engaged on you, they just deploy the barrier and are trying to use it to kind of like go around the corner or something, feel free. And more than that, feel encouraged to focus this barrier down as hard as you can. If both 6 heroes are hitting it, it'll break.
Okay, the rest of the Symmetra stuff is actually the sentry turrets. Damage per second is lowered by 10 from 50 to 40. And this stacks because there are 3 of them. So if you're getting hit by 3 turrets, you're not taking 150 damage a second anymore. You're taking 120, which is much more manageable for tracers that just happen to blink in front of them with the slow. Okay, it's not too bad. The next thing is the photon projector. What is this? This is her beam. Her beam gun, not the orb version of the alternate fire, but the players impacted by the primary beam will now actually have a louder impact sound. So when you get laser beamed and you're hearing the zzz, kind of like the stepping into the barbershop sound, it's going to be a lot louder, so you know if you're getting beamed down, which is good because it was ironically very, very quiet until it was fully charged for whatever reason. So the
And
impact sound,
sometimes
so when it hits you, it's going to be louder when it wasn't,
and
as
maybe
opposed
this
to when it's not.
will grab the attention more of people, especially at the lower elos. I think that Symmetra is one of those heroes that is easy to overlook because she's just kind of hanging out behind the shields and stuff. Just she can be hard to focus. She can be going in and out of doors and stuff. But she's one of the heroes that you want to focus the hardest if she tries to engage you in the front line, right? Because if you
Yeah.
don't and she gets out of hand, it's sort of the same idea as Zarya. She can just carry the entire fight from that point on.
Now let's talk about the change that kind of just slipped in the bottom here. But we're not going to let Blizzard get away with trying to sneak this one past us. No, no, no. We found it. Tracer got a buff for maybe the first time since it got reverted, basically. Because the
This,
last time she got buffed, it was a revert.
yeah, honestly, this is the first buff Tracer
This is like
has
the
ever
first buff
had
Tracer's
in
ever
her
gotten.
life because, yeah, the previous buff was more of a nerf than then they reverted.
So what does it mean? Okay. This is actually a really cool change because there's a lot of elements affecting this that are not in the written text. Okay, so the first thing is it's about her primary fire, her pulse pistols. Damage fall off starts at 30 meters, not at 10. Okay, so it was 10 meters, and then your pellets started dropping off crazy fast in the damage. So your damage would be much lower on each pistol hitting, but now it's 13. So what does this mean? There's a couple things that you have to remember about pulse pistols. The spread is pretty big. So regardless of what range you're at, where your fall off starts, the spread of your gun when the pulse pistols are firing is only going to hit in that area accurately. Okay, so if you're at a further distance, you have more chance to miss, even if your crosshairs are dead tracked on the right target's head. Okay. Next is even when your effective range is 10 meters, sometimes Andres mentioned this in our pre-show, you need to still probably sit at about 5 to blow them up, right? Because then even at 10 meters, some of the smaller targets, you're like, okay, I still want to be at 5 so I get every single one of those glass cannon hits to be really fast in a small area on the head, and then they're dead.
Yeah. I think that with this change, like 13 meters is not going to be your sweet spot now. It's more that you're gonna be able to deal a little bit more damage at a further distance, which can be good for poking, for finishing off heroes. I think that Tracer's effective range, like Rob said, is still like right in the face, basically melee range, just like Reaper wants to be. You want to be as close as
Yeah.
possible so that the spread from your guns gets minimized as much as possible, and all your pellets are hitting them, and hopefully hitting them in a critical area like the face. You're usually aiming at the neck with her, so you can get a bunch of extra damage in. You can one clip people at that distance. But that being said, your your effective range does fall off really sharply, and sometimes even being at over 10 meters away from a target, which is still a very dangerous position to be in, right? You're still basically
Hmm.
engaged at that point with the enemy. It's quite dangerous, and her damage really does fall off to the point where it might be really hard to finish off certain low heroes or just do any effective poking, right? And I
Hmm.
do think that Tracer is not in the worst state right now in this meta game. Aside from her damage output being a little bit lower than maybe a Reaper is against a tank, she's not
She's
terrible,
annoying.
right? She can be very
Yeah.
annoying in this meta game. It can be really hard to kill with the heroes that are currently being run, like Orisa, Lucio, Moira. All these heroes don't have a ton of just burst damage. They just don't deal a ton of damage all at once, which is usually what kills tracers. As long as
Hmm.
damage is just being trickled on you, it's very easy for you to blink away, recall,
Get
etc.
out.
And also most of those heroes don't have a ton of mobility aside from Lucio and Moira, but you don't want Lucio and Moira chasing the enemy tracer for the most part anyway. So again, she's not the most ideal DPS, not like Doomfist or Reaper is right now, but she's not in a bad spot either, and she can really cause a lot of disruption. And with the other changes that are being added, the Winston being better, Diva being a little bit better, Mercy being a little bit better, maybe all that cumulatively will give sort of Dive a fighting chance, or at least be incentivized for
Hmm.
people to try it out. Will it be better than the current double shield metacom that we have right now? I don't know. Hard to tell.
The effective range is also really interesting. That what Andres was saying about the poke. The poke is actually pretty big because you charge your ultimate ridiculously fast in the first place, faster than most heroes in general. And being able to have a longer effective range, even if you're just kind of like tickling people, you're still getting a higher damage output with each individual pulse shot pellet, and that adds up over time to get your pulse bomb really really quickly. And then on top of that, the other thing is this helps a lot with outranging tanks when you're in that range where the spread is irrelevant. You're just going for lots of headshots, sure, but the body shots are just as valuable at that point when you're just trying to stack up damage and cause chaos. So you're able to get and rack up and farm tanks for your ultimate as well. All right. There is a few bug changes that we're going to go through that are very, very brief. I'm not going to even hit them all. But the first one that I want to talk about is Brigitte's bug, which actually seemed to be pretty significant, is about her rally. This is her ultimate. For whatever reason, the bug is that before, when you check line of sight with his ability to give armor to your allies, the line of sight change was bugged to check from her foot position. So if you're trying to look at a target and you're not at, Brigitte's head position where your crosshairs are and where your game camera is, if you saw the target, sometimes they still wouldn't get the Inspire, even though they're in range and within the LOS. So now they fixed it so that if you're within the aim, a pitch of where your head would be, then you're going to be getting the benefit of that. So that's a really, really good change for Brigitte, kind of something to just bring her to basically working properly. There's just a couple of visual bugs or there's a visual bug for Winston. The a kind of a weird bug with Sombra. I don't really know how else to describe it, but it just says fixed a bug where EMP's position being affected by a player's aim pitch. So where you were aiming sometimes would affect EMP working properly. And then there's also a bug that Sigma's gravitic flux would ignore LOS through certain ceilings. So the ability is just going to be a little bit more consistent when you're getting hit rather than when he's using it, if that makes sense. So overall, just kind of just a couple of things that were kind of really weird that were going on and that they found and fixed. So that's kind of going to do it for the show. Honestly, this is a packed set of changes that we were able to kind of hopefully dedicate the whole show to in order to explain them a bit better for you this time. Maybe that making sense more will kind of inform your decisions on what you think of the changes or what opinions you may formulate in your own mind. And that's kind of what we're hoping for today. Now that Shazir's back from his meetings, I can shout him out because he dropped us 1,000 bits yet again. Thanks for popping in the chat, Shaz, and giving us those bits. If you guys want to give us bits or sub to us on our affiliate Twitch, it's twitch.tv/Omnic Lab. You can come hang out in the chat when we go live. You get a notification, all that jazz.
Yeah, I think that'll do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for sticking with us. Interesting patch. I think that we've been kind of waiting for something like this for a while since 222 came out, but they've been sort of waiting their time and biding their time. We speculated that they maybe didn't want to make too many changes before Overwatch League was over. And I mean, this weekend is Overwatch League final, so it makes sense that the patch finally kind of like sort of made it to PTR now. Finals will kind of end in the current patch. Everything will be fine and dandy, and then I'm imagining we're gonna get a lot of these changes coming into the game itself, and maybe more to come before next season even begins. We still have BlizzCon to be announced, which I'm guessing a new hero will be announced, maybe a new map. I don't expect anything too big. Aside from that, we just had 222 being released. We've Overwatch League going into individual cities next year. I think that they have a lot in their plate right now that they're focusing on.
I'm buckling up to go visit Seoul, boys.
Oh, yeah.
Games, hopefully that'll be
you're
great.
You're going to have games over there. Absolutely. We're going to have 2 homestands here in Atlanta, and there's going to be a ton of games all over the place. I know that some of the players are already kind of dreading all the traveling. I kind of feel for them a little bit. But that being said, this is unprecedented. This is going to be an interesting experiment to finally see the teams go to their cities, because this is what they promised, right? Back in the day when Overwatch League was launching, they were like, hey, we want to make this localized. We want to make it city-based. Next year will be, I guess, the first final form of the league.
Yeah, the first real test.
Yeah.
That being said, that just a side note, since Overwatch League is going to be concluding this weekend, please don't do what most people do and not support T2. Go check out Contenders. Go check out Tier 3 Overwatch. Support the streams. Watch the streamers. Go check out our friend Labosco when he's casting. Go check out TESPA, Collegiate League. Collegiate Leagues are super exciting because the skill levels are crazy different for some of these games. And it can get really, really hype. So please go support those leagues, and also try to follow the Overwatch World Cup. You'll see some of your favorite Overwatch League people playing in those games as well. Definitely keep trying to follow T2 scene while you still can. And while the turnover is really high, the games are really, really exciting still. And the level is basically the same for most of the consumer from where you guys are standing. The levels are pretty much around the same. And I'm not saying that I'm not in that as well. I feel like if I'm watching Contenders or I'm watching Overwatch League, that skill level is something that I would never dream of achieving. So that's insane. Let's talk to our sponsors here. Thank you to Refire, Shazir, Shepard, Crimson Fail, Chris to Play, Tragic Zach, and Darren W. Thank you guys so much for your support at the top level. We could not thank you guys enough, and shouting you out every week is the least we could do to just show our appreciation for you guys. If you want to check out more about our Diamond sponsorship stuff, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Omnic Lab. You can also check them out on our sponsorship page on our website if you want to see what they're up to. If you want to go see what our sponsorships do, you can see that. And if you guys want to check out our merch or our website, omniclab.com/links is the best way to find all that stuff. We're going to wrap up today's show, but a brief announcement. Andres and I are figuring out that we had a big hiccup last week. We mentioned about Google Play Music in our show, as well as Stitcher, and we are currently working with Libsyn to get those resolved. So we are in the process right now. They should be fixed soon. So if you are listening to this on an app that you don't really like, we're working on it. We're actually actively pursuing this right now. So thank you for your patience. And we apologize that you've been waiting. Like some of you said that they haven't been updated for like 3 months. That's insane. That's like 12 episodes.
We really do apologize for that. Unfortunately, sometimes having so many different outlets where the podcast goes, something breaks every once in a while. And we did change publishers in the middle of the year, so I guess not all of the ends were tied as we thought they were.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're making sure that everything's fine and dandy now for all you Google Play listeners.
If you're finding some more issues, I noticed one for me on iTunes as well, like with some keywords and searching. It's kind of hard to find our show now. So if you guys have anything that you notice as well, please feel free to share it with us. Email, Discord, Twitter, tweet at us, whatever. We'll get your messages and we'll try to take that in and go hunt it down. We're working on that right now. So if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at the tag NotRob. I'm also the same tag on Instagram if you want to follow any of the adventures here in Japan we got going on. Andres, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at iPlayGames. You spelled that IPLAI Games.
And don't be a lab rat, be a scientist. We will see all of you next week, and I'll see some of you at the game night. See you then.
I have nothing more to teach you. The rest